Welcome, everybody. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Jose Manuel Garza Jr. He is a lecturer at Texas State University's School of Music, where he teaches music theory and aural skills courses. He received his bachelor's degree in music studies and master's degree in music theory from Texas State University, and then attended Florida State University, where he received his PhD in music theory. Dr. Garza's dissertation, Adapt and Prevail, New Applications of Rhythmic and Metric Analysis in Contemporary Metal Music, examines paradigmatic structures in metalcore, progressive metal, and death metal from the latter halves of the 1990s to today, implementing both existing models of analysis and introducing some new ones. His other research interests include video game music, percussion repertoire, and 20th and 21st century art music, but today we are primarily interested in his 2020 paper, Transcending Time Fields, Riff Types, Timekeeping Cymbals, and Time Fields in Contemporary Metal Music. So for my first question for you, your track record of achievements is inspiring for any young music scholar. What initially sparked your interest in music theory, in popular music analysis, or in heavy metal music studies?
So in general, I felt like I had a lot of fun with music theory when I was an undergrad. And I had a lot of success with it. I actually hadn't thought about going further with music theory while I was like after I had done my, theory and oral four kind of stuff. But by the time I was finishing up my undergrad degree, I thought I was already kind of deciding like, yeah, I want to keep on going with this, and I really enjoyed music theory and I want to dive more into it. The funny thing was that as I was thinking about that, I said, well, I'm gonna have to get real good and get real knowledgeable about, the kind of standard art music kind of thing. So I thought, well, I guess I kind of really like Bartok, so I'll start looking more into his works and all that stuff. Um, and while I was in my first semester in my master's, I actually came across popular music analysis and I said, "Oh, we can do this? Yeah, sign me up. I'm just gonna go that way." I still like Bot Talk and everything, but so the reason that I was very excited about that was because that was kind of my I was a band kid. So a lot of the music that we covered in theory and all that stuff, was very orchestra and piano and voice and not a lot of band stuff. But even aside from that, I was just really into punk and metal music. Since I was in middle school. So having the outlet to finally talk about that music a lot more is like, okay, yes, I this is and what I really feel like I'm an expert in, is what kind of got me into that.
That's awesome. So you talk about a little bit more about your background here. You shared a little bit when you said that you started listening to metal music in middle school. What
Mhm.
specific interests did you come across?
So I actually started with punk with a little game called Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and my exposure to that, and then from there I just started buying a lot of compilations and stuff like that. And at some point there were compilations that had some metalcore bands in them, and I said, oh cool, this is a little bit heavier, it's got some screaming in it instead of just singing. So I was into metalcore for a long time before I got into anything more obscure. And finally, later on, I started picking up a little bit more death metal, a little bit more black metal, and then all of the other stuff until, now at this point, I'm just kind of drawing from whatever I can. I like it all.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have any specific bands that you listened to when you were growing up?
Um, my first metalcore band, I would say, or my first favorite metalcore band was Avenged Sevenfold.
Okay.
And since then, I would say that my kind of long-lasting favorite band would be Between the Buried and Me. Um, and the Dillinger Escape Plan would be my kind of two big ones. But now that I've branched out to other subgenres, I've started grabbing, favorites from others, and like I really like Black Dahlia Murder in the death metal sphere. Bands like Immortal in black metal, Intronaut, bands, the Contortionists, bands like that kind of just do really cool, interesting stuff. And even if not, just I like listening to it.
Yeah.
But I also do, go to concerts pretty regularly. So I engage with the music that way, and I compose my own music, which is, another way for me to kind of use as an outlet.
You compose metal music?
Hmm.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You doing any shows anytime soon?
No, unfortunately not.
Would love to promote you here. As somebody who I was primarily a jazz musician growing up, so getting into your paper, kind of understanding the metal music life as a drum set player was
Mhm.
really intriguing for me. How would you advise people who aren't accustomed to the metal music scene? How can they get into this? And how could somebody who maybe doesn't have a theory background take your paper and dive into that?
So, I it's hard to tell from the outside, but I kind of like to think that I don't write really complicated things. But again, I have the bias of like, oh, I just, I feel like I understand rhythm and meter really well, and I try to explain things simply. But um, with regard to just accessible or like accessing or getting into metal music outside, I'm glad you mentioned I'm a drummer, by the way, for those watching that I didn't mention that. And a percussion. I'm a classically trained percussionist, so part of the what drew me into rhythm and meter studies in general was that I think that connection is pretty clear. But in general, for me to encourage anybody to get into any kind of music is to listen to it and find at least one thing about it that you like. I can sit down and listen to a genre that I'm not going to name any genres because I don't want to, hurt anybody here. But let's see, I sit down and listen to a genre that I don't really like. I'm in like a store or somebody else's car listening to the radio, and that's the music that's playing, and I don't have any power to change it. And I say, well, oh, that was kind of a cool drum fill, or oh, hey, they extended that, or oh, I could use that for my theory class to explain sentences or something. With metal music in particular, I know that it could be kind of hard for a lot of people who like aesthetically just I can't deal with the screaming. I value being able to understand the lyrics, and that just doesn't do it for me, and I can understand that. Um, but there are several metal bands that exist that have only clean vocals. You can get into gothic metal or some progressive metal bands who just don't do any harsh vocals. Um, Alternative metal. Yeah, so just different ways. And then kind of like how I did, where metalcore is a relatively light, metal. And I used it as kind of a ramp to get into, well, they screamed sometimes. And then, oh, hey, well, here's some bands that don't do any clean singing. And that just got me into other stuff. So it's a progression. I feel like a lot of people think that they have to jump right into the most extreme thing right away, or that if they listen to the most extreme thing right away and they say, I don't like it, that means that they're not gonna like any metal music. It's like, no, you got ins.
Yeah. And so diving a little bit more and specifically into your paper, you approach a lot of fundamental aspects of metal music, and I loved how you used the opportunity in your paper to explore a diverse selection of subgenres. You
Mhm.
explored black metal, death metal, doom metal, grindcore, metalcore, progressive metal, sludge metal, and thrash metal, which
Mhm.
was a lot, and it was really fun to get to present on all of those different subgenres to
Mhm.
the class that I was in. Were there
Mhm.
any additional subgenres you considered adding and including in this paper, but ultimately decided against?
Um, so the reason that I chose from so many is just to say, hey, this is widely applicable. And I also try to draw from as many different time periods as possible. And I continue to want to do that. But bands like or subgenres like uh, like drone metal or like some strains of avant-garde metal. I left out just because there's not a lot of percussion to be heard in drone metal specifically. So not really, you can always find exceptions, and other ways in which you can kind of invoke while not actually really playing a feel. But I feel like those two, and with regard to avant-garde, it's like there's not always a steady meter that's to be held, and arguably for those two things, that's not really the point, quote unquote, anyway. So I want to engage with the music in ways that make sense for that genre of music, and I think in some ways the time feel stuff maybe doesn't quite apply to that.
Interesting. I definitely enjoyed getting to look into all sorts of metal music when I was looking through your paper, but I hadn't come across the avant-garde stuff. I should look in more into that. It'd be fun. So in addition to, all these different subgenres, you reference a lot of researchers who've explored on these subjects. When was the first time that you came across some research that inspired you to create this paper?
So just my overall interest in metal music analysis, you have early writings by like Robert Walser in 1983, Running with the Devil. That's got some theory stuff in it. And then like if you want to say, oh, this is really rhythm and meter in metal music, you've got Jonathan Peasley's article from 2007 on Meshuggah specifically. Um, so th those kinds of places are good starting points. And I also found some other stuff, most notably a dissertation by Greg McCandless, um, who studied at FSU just before me, wrote on rhythm and meter in dream theater. And that's why I looked at that and I said, hey, they're open to that kind of analysis over there. And that's why I ultimately ended up interviewing and attending for my PhD. But yeah, just seeing the fact that, in my head as I'm listening to these songs, I'm thinking like, oh, cool, that's this time signature and that time signature, and I want to do more with it. And seeing these early writings on metal music made me want to say, oh, I can do it too.
So one of the other questions that I have for you, I am a musicologist currently here at KU
Mhm.
studying, and trying to relate your field in the music theory world. How much of the research that you came across was music theory research, and how much of it was musicology research?
That's a great question. A lot of the research is musicology based, because a lot of people are interested in the social or the cultural aspects of it. Um, Keith Con Harris in the extreme metal culture, Michelle Filipov talking about uh death metal and so on and so forth. Um, I think that there's a lot of interdisciplinary stuff that can happen. It's really difficult to analyze this kind of music without talking about the musicological side of it. You know, what sure, this is a time field, but what does the time field do? Oh, well, when it's double time, people running around in a circle. Oh, when it's halftime, a lot of the times people, mosh. Oh, or so those two things relate very much. And I think it's still generally a lot of musicology. There is a lot of, there's been more and more music theory involved with that. But I hope to kind of buff up the music theory side of it a bit.
Yeah. You mentioned that you go to a lot of live concerts. Do you think that it's important for people to go to live metal concerts in order to get the cultural aspects and see it and feel it?
That's a good question. I wouldn't force anybody to go. Just because, some people, like I have a friend who's just like, I don't like going to live concerts because my best experience is with the recording where I can hear everything properly and I don't have to deal with a bunch of, other people around me and all that stuff. Um, I think from my perspective, I think it adds a lot to it. Just I saw Opeth a few weeks ago nearby, and um, I went with a couple of friends who, as Opeth was playing, I was like looking down at my phone and taking notes. And from an outsider's point of view, they probably thinking like this dude's so bored that he's on his phone instead of listening to this awesome band play live. And here I am thinking like, oh, that's a good example to use and whatever. And my friends asked me about it later, like, what you doing on your phone? I'm like, they're like, are you taking notes? I'm like, yeah, yeah. That's wow. So it's not only the fact that I'm listening to these because I could have just listened to the CD and grabbed that stuff, but also like, oh, what does the vocalist say in the live performance? Like, all right, everybody get in a circle pit. Oh, hey, they didn't say that, in the recording, but that gives me an idea of how there's interplay there. Oh, or when do the fans start clapping? It's like, oh, when that kick is on all four hits or whatever. So you get some more of that fan and musician interplay that could really inform your analysis of something.
Yeah, I love that. I think I remember the first time that I was in a mosh pit, it was by accident. It was definitely a fun experience, and I will remember it forever. So,
Mhm, mhm.
so a couple more things I wanted to talk on. One of the big ones, though, was your visualized summaries of the timekeeping symbol categories and the riff types. It was extremely helpful in my own understanding of this article. So, thank you so much for that. Are the categorizations that you've established with these fixed, or do you see them as kind of a flexible framework that you can reinterpret?
I think that they can be flexible, definitely. It's hard to generalize because as soon as you generalize something, there's always like, well, what about this one? You go, well, and there are certain things where, especially with the riff types, where I continue to listen to music and I hear something and I go, well, I can call that a pedal tone riff, but it also has elements of this other thing. So there's, I did cover hybrid things at near the end of the article, but there are certain genres, especially the ones that kind of have more overlap with just mainstream rock in general, that tend to use some riff types that don't quite fit the framework, if you will, of what I gave. Um, so and obviously progressive metal just does a lot of stuff. They just experiment all the time. So yeah, to the short form of the question is
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
they're absolutely flexible.
I love, yeah, you definitely cover a lot of good examples at the end of your paper that are the hybrid examples and special cases. Have you come across any bands like that particularly continuously challenge this framework though?
Mm. Um, I can't think of anything like specific off the top of my head, but I would say like I mentioned earlier, just progressive bands in general tend to do stuff like that. Bands that like the Dillinger Escape Plan that I mentioned earlier, like I would say for some of their songs, most of the time is not in a time field because they're doing something else. Um, yeah, there are just certain bands whose like just drum patterns in general are more fluid. They're not. It's not like kick snare kick snare. It sounds like a continuous fill, if you will, rather than just a pattern that's repeated and then sometimes fills. It's like there's always interplay between the drums and the other instruments. And I would say that that happens in sludge metal a lot too. That makes it a little bit more resistant to categorization.
So one of the last parts kind of I have a cut about your research and the
Mhm,
use of this article. I love
mhm.
being able to go more into metal music, but do you think that this work could be applied to musical styles outside of heavy metal and its many subgenres?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, I'm also really big into punk music. So, some of these riff types, for example, the weak beat syncopation, that's very much hardcore and punk influenced, and you can find that there all the time. Um, yeah, there's a lot of overlap, especially as time passes by. Even punk borrows from metal sometimes, so you get that going too.
Yeah.
Um, in a paper that I gave at SMT a few years ago, which was kind of like the prototype version of this article. In that paper, I focused on rock in general, not just on metal music. So I had like one other type of riff type that I didn't end up using in the article because it was more for generalized rock as opposed to metal specifically. Um, but yeah, any time run into you'll run into time feels in all sorts of music, not just in metal music. It's in rock, it's in hip hop, it's in pop, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It might just have snaps instead of snares, but it's there.
Well, I'm definitely excited to use your research in some of my own studies. I'm using my studies right now to look at the Arabian blues music
Oh,
and
okay.
a group called Badu Mokhtar. And so I went and saw them live recently. But your research has been really helpful, especially with the guitar knowledge. As a drum set player, I don't know as much. So it was really helpful in my own understanding. So
Oh, good. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, thank you. So that's most of the questions that I have about your research.
Mhm.
I have some other questions outside of your research, as if it's okay.
Yeah,
Mostly, I
absolutely.
would love to know, could you provide some more insight into your studies of video game music?
Sure, yeah. So I just, well, I mentioned Tony Hawk Pro Skater earlier, in this interview. And I enjoy, just like RPGs. I enjoy rhythm games. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Dance Dance Revolution. Um, Games of that, or Guitar Hero, I guess, is more familiar. But I don't
Rock
really play
Band, Kid
Guitar
Drum,
Hero.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Th Those kinds of games. Those are rhythm games. Uh, so how music in with regard to RPGs, for example, a few years ago, I presented at Music and the Moving Image on how music in a game called Persona, or Persona 4 specifically, the fourth installment. There is the title of the game and themes of the game borrow from Jungian psychology. So I explored how the music reflected those themes and how it reflected the characters' psyches and all of that stuff. So that was kind of cool into getting into the interdisciplinary of like psychology and music. I think in a later music in the movie image, I also presented on the nostalgia topic. So again, I'm particularly interested in musical meaning with regard to with video game music. Yeah, I like engaging with that music because otherwise I just play it, right? But
Yeah,
The games, that is.
I can relate to your video game stories. I think for me it was Need for Speed Underground 2 was the game that
Mm-hmm.
introduced me to a lot of new music and ideas. So that's really interesting, the comparisons that we can make here. But yeah,
Hmm.
that's so fun. And I love the idea of this new kind of field growing. If you know, I'm like me as a new scholar, if I wanted to get into reading more about ludomusicology or video
Hmm.
game analysis, what are some of the like core foundational studies that have come out that you've used in your own
Hmm.
analysis?
Um, I like to think about just the big names in general. I'm thinking particularly of like William Gibbons, but because I'm interested so much in musical meaning, basically anybody who's written on topic theory and the intersection between music and topic theory in general. Um, the names are all escaping me right now. I know I've cited several people, but yeah, I know William Gibbons sticks out as somebody who you really need to look into his stuff because I have a lot of interests that overlap with what he's written about.
I'll definitely check him out. Thank you.
Hmm.
Another question I had for you. In 2017, during your time at Florida State University, you participated in a rock ensemble, which
Hmm.
inspired you to establish your own ensemble at Texas State University in 2019. Could
Hmm.
you share more about the process of forming and sustaining such an ensemble?
Sure. So, since I arrived at Texas State in the year before, 2018, I had been wanting to do it. I mean, participated with it at Florida State, and I said, I really want to do this wherever I go teach. Um, so that first year, it was just kind of like, lingering feeling, but I couldn't do anything about it. But then, spring of 2019, before I started it, they asked me like, we have a sound recording technology program at Texas State. So the director of that program asked me specifically, like, "Hey, you did a rock ensemble at Florida State University. Would you be willing to do one here?" I'm like, "Yes, I've been wanting to. Thank you for asking. I just don't have a place to rehearse." And he said, "Well, we got a studio." And I said, "You got a director." So, um, yeah, it started for one semester as not for credit, and then the semester afterward, it started counting for credit for certain majors, and it's been a blast. It's like one of my favorite things to do. The students here are like it's amazing. You go to your first rehearsal and you're like, okay, I'm gonna have to do the whole thing. We're like, hey, you guys need to practice outside of time or whatever, and they come back and they come in and they play it perfect or not perfectly, but they can run it through, and I go, oh, okay, well, great. They're very whether they're doing it for credit or not, they're very passionate and they're very like they're excited about it. They this is the only opportunity for a lot of them to play that kind of music that they enjoy. Especially if, they're like a music performance or music education major and they're, you know, mostly just interfacing with classical, mu quote unquote music, right? So the feedback I've gotten from the students is really great. Um, it, so I think the big thing is, do you have a place that you can rehearse that's not going to bother anybody around you, right? That where you can get loud. Um, and you have the support from other faculty, especially I can imagine that it could be a challenge at like an institution where like the classical music is very like the art music component is very prominent and you know there can be a perception of like, hey, that you want to steal the students who would otherwise be performing in our ensembles, right? So that could be like one of the challenges. I don't know if you want me to like explain the general rundown of how I run it.
Please, I'd love for you to elaborate as much as you want.
So things might change a little bit next semester, but the way that I had been doing it since we started it is the students come in, there's between 15 and 20 usually, which is a pretty good number. We've had more than 20 before, we've had slightly less than 15 before. Um, I ask each of the students to suggest um four songs. I think I started with three, but now I said, and we're not going to play all four of those songs, but can you suggest one? That's not going to work. Okay, suggest and so on and so forth. And you go down the line, right? But four is like fail proof.
Yeah.
So um the song that gets selected, not everybody's gonna have a song selected by them. Like let's say I have an ensemble of 20 people. It's like we can't play 20 songs. We meet once per week for 2.5 hours. It's like, it doesn't work. So I usually try to get it at about 15. So 15 of those people get their song selected, and it also depends on whether they're taking it for credit or not. And if your song gets selected, you lead the song. And the way that that works is basically they look for resources, they look for tabs, they look for lyrics, they look for video references, and they post them on our Canvas, which is our learning management system. And the other students go grab the resources and they learn the songs in their own time, then we all get together. Now they don't actually lead the rehearsal. That's me. Otherwise I'd just be standing there, right? But they do get to make certain like creative decisions like, oh, hey, this song fades out. How many times are we going to repeat it before it, we're not going to fade out live. It's going to sound funny. Or, this solo is played without any effects, but the person might want to use some kind of effect or something. So they get to not just have their song get played, but get to have a bit of say in how it's performed. Um, and my intervention in that is fairly minimal. Every once in a while I'll step in and say, even if they're excited about a song, I'll go like, too much profanity, or that has four guitar parts and that's not gonna work for us, or something like that. Um, but for the most part, we can smooth it over and say, hey, just substitute this word for that word or something like that. Or you know, the person might have to go a little bit out of their way to find a tab somewhere where it's, they might not normally find it. Whatever happens. Um, but yeah, so we rehearse once a week. And I like to split it up that we rehearse 5 songs a week about, and each of those songs gets a half-hour time slot. I don't have 20 performers per song, you know. They get to choose which songs they perform in with again a little bit of my intervention of saying like, hey, you've only got 2 songs, you need more, or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, they only have to show up for the song that they're participating in. So let's say we have songs A, B, C, D, and E, and a given student only performs in songs A and C. Then they only have to come at the first half hour of rehearsal and the third half hour of rehearsal, and then the other times they can, do what they need to do. Um, yeah, like I said, I'm changing a few things next semester. I'm gonna form like little units instead of having it kind of be a free for all, so that scheduling gets a little bit easier. There's a lot of work on the front end as a director, the way that I run it. That usually gets easier as the semester goes by, but scheduling can be kind of rough.
Yeah. I love that you're allowing your students really the option to select the songs that they want to play. I think that's probably the best way to get them to really be motivated by the songs that they're learning.
Mhm.
I'm comparing the way that these ensembles are run to the way that jazz combos tend to be run at some schools. And
Mhm.
one of the things I have for you to question is, do you think that a rock reel book is in our future? It's sort of a method that we can have a bunch of songs and allow students to kind of choose from, but still get the freedom of choosing. Do you think that would improve your course or limit your students' options to play the songs that they want to?
Hmm. I can imagine a rock reel book, but it would be very, very, very large. And it would be, I think it would be very weighted towards older rock at this point. Because we don't have the, 50 plus years of hindsight to say that this song is going to be really important for, that it came out in 2010, but um I'm sure you can make some arguments for like songs by the Strokes, or something like that that my students really like to perform. Uh, I in the past have allowed the students to choose just kind of whatever songs, and there are some times where I'll go in and say like, hey, there are no tabs available for this song. Everybody's gonna have to transcribe it. Let's pick something else. I'll make some exceptions on like they're bass tabs, but there are only chords. There are no guitar tabs, and the guitars will say we can figure it out. But I'm not sure if you're familiar with the site Songster, which is it's basically a tab site, but you can like play back the tabs, and it has like all the instrument parts put together, so you can hear them all together. You can mute certain ones, um, though that might require a subscription. Anyway, so I'm thinking about requiring the songs that they choose, or yeah, to already be on that site, because it's really easy to pull from that. But it has a lot of stuff, and I have at least one student who has uh put their own stuff there. So they might have suggested the song a year ago and it wouldn't have been there, but they suggest the song again a couple semesters later and it's suddenly there. It's like, oh, I wonder who put these tabs up, but they're good. So, um, yeah, going back to the question of the real book, I can imagine that. But it would either be very, very large or very, very biased towards older rock.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you on that one. Do you know if there are any public schools in your area who are also trying to implement these rock ensembles? And if, I was a teacher wanting to implement this, what would be some of the challenges and rewards that I might face from this?
Mm-hmm. Um, I don't know of any public schools around us. In fact, I'm not sure of any universities around us doing it also. But are you speaking specifically about like K through 12 public
Yes.
schools?
Mhm.
Um, I can imagine it overall, in general, the way that music is going it towards, more accessible, like just music for all as opposed to music for just the people interested in art music. I can imagine that it's something that will start to become more of a thing, and that people will embrace, especially the students themselves, because I mean, I imagine that there are some students there who, yes, they are primarily interested in classical music and not so much popular music, but I feel like a lot of students would be. I know if it came up when I was in high school, I would definitely jump on that opportunity. Um, so as before, the challenges of like, oh, can you find a rehearsal space that doesn't, you know, just bother everybody in a 20-foot or, more
I'm
of
sure
a
it would be much
radius,
harder with
right?
rock music. So,
Right. And but yeah, I would have to get more of a feel of what like principals and stuff are thinking with regard to that kind of music. I think it could be a good sell on the part of directors, and if that and there's another challenge is, are the directors themselves learned enough in popular music styles? So
I think I'd agree with everything you said so far. And do you have any other things that you'd like to share with us today? Any ongoing research projects that you've got that you want to promote?
sure. I'm currently working on a book that I will send in a proposal for at some point. It's going to be on rhythm and meter and meaning in metal music. Kind of drawing a bit from my dissertation, but also adding a whole bunch of new stuff and just being, the first book of its type to look into specifically theoretical rhythm and meter and deal how that interfaces with rhythm. I mean with meaning, rhythm and meter and meaning. I also have a few book chapters coming out soon, in edited volumes. So I'm involved in four, which is cool. But yeah.
Awesome.
So
Well, I
looking
look
forward
forward
to
to
writing more about it.
and I look forward to reading all about it. So
Mhm.
thank you so much for joining me here today. That's the interview. Thank you again for making this happen. This has been wonderful, and I've learned so much from you today.
Yeah, and thank you for talking with me. It's really humbling to have somebody excited about my work, and I'm looking forward to what you're doing too. Especially you're talking about ludomusicology as well, and yeah, I'm
Yeah,
always interested to read
I'm
more
a
stuff.
percussionist over here, but I'm trying to figure out my life. I'm in the second year of my PhD musicology program and leaning towards ethnomusicology and conga
Hmm.
drumming.
Hmm.
But as a drum set player, I love seeing research like yours that's out there. So thank you so
Hmm.
much. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Jack. I appreciate it.